Most Americans are already planning this year's vacation, and if you're going overseas, you might want to consider brushing up on your global P's and Q's. What's perfectly acceptable in our country, a hand gesture or a greeting, may be an insult elsewhere. Dean Foster wrote the Global Etiquette Guide to Europe. He is in New York this weekend, where he'll speak at the New York Times travel show. Dean, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kelly.
Well, why don't we start with a very popular Mediterranean destination, Greece. You had some interesting insight for our viewers concerning that country.
Yeah, you know, sometimes what Americans might view as just a wave could be really insulting in some of the Eastern Mediterranean cultures. For example, you know, if you raise your hand up like this and try to wave at someone, well, that's a gesture in Greece that traditionally has been really quite aggressive. And also, if you want to call somebody over, what you want to do is you want to hold your hand parallel to the ground, and you just want to kind of do this kind of a motion. It looks like waving goodbye, but in fact, what you're doing is you're calling somebody over.
I mean, do you get cut any slack being an American, and Greece obviously a very popular tourist destination?
Well, you know, I think Americans, like most people, they're admired, but they're considered a little bit naive sometimes when they travel abroad, and you want to show some respect for the way that people do things in other cultures, so that you can simply break out of the tourist bubble. I think a lot of people stay within a tourist bubble, and they really don't get the most out of their trip. But if you break out of that tourist bubble and understand how people really think and do things, then you can connect with the people, and your trip is so much richer.
I think so too. Let's go to the Arab world. What do we need to know if traveling to that part of the world?
Well, you want to recognize that it's very varied, and country by country it can be different. But there are some general things about the Arab world that you should be aware of, certainly as a Westerner. For one thing, you want to avoid using your left hand, because the left hand is really the hand that's considered unclean. And so always use your right hand, particularly if you're passing food or touching people or passing important documents. Never show the sole of your shoe, because the sole of your shoe is the part of your body that touches the ground, and it's the dirtiest part of your body. If you remember when the statue of Saddam came down, some of the Iraqis were actually hitting the statue with their shoe. It was really quite an insult to do that. And it was a sign of anger.
Right.
So you want to be careful about that. Right. And men and women...
Go ahead.
Men and women should also be careful about touching each other, because in some of the more devout countries, men and women in the Muslim world don't touch.
All right. Spain, also some rules to be aware of there.
Well, the interesting thing is when you compare Spain to, let's say, Hispanic South America, you know, if you're introduced to a woman, let's say, and you don't know her marital status, in Spain, typically, you want to refer to her as señora, but in Hispanic South America, you'd be better off referring to her as señorita. Of course, if she was obviously older, then you would refer to her as señora. And if you know her marital status, well, then you're set.
Okay, Japan. I know lots of rules to follow there. I lived there for a while, but tell us what you think is the most important thing for our viewers to know.
Well, you know, in Japan, if you're greeting someone, you always have to have a lot of business cards, certainly if you're there on business. But even if you're there just traveling casually, East Asian cultures are non-touching cultures, and you want to be sure not to greet someone with a firm handshake or a strong handshake, or just a soft handshake is good enough. If you give someone a business card, always give it to them with two hands, receive a business card with two hands. If you're giving gifts in East Asia or accepting gifts, you give and accept them with two hands always, and never open your gift.
I think we have time for one more. I think one more, Brazil.
Sure, in Brazil, never make the OK sign like we do in the U.S., because that's really quite offensive. Better off just to smile and give a thumbs up.
All right. Well, good advice. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, and hope to see you at the travel show.
Okay. Oh, that would be nice to go to.